Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to our explainer on decision-making processes in organizations. Whether we're talking about a scrappy little startup, a multi-generational family business, or a massive multinational corporation, the absolute bedrock of their success, or honestly their failure, comes down to exactly how they make decisions. Every single day, managers are making these choices that just ripple out. They affect employees, customers, shareholders, and literally the very future of the organization. So today we're going to unpack the architecture of those choices. We'll explore the frameworks, the pitfalls, and the strategies that the world's absolute best leaders use to navigate complexity.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the anatomy of a decision, 3 models of choice, the power of group decisions, how to overcome biases and traps, the manager's toolkit, and finally, culture, crises, and ethics. It's a really practical toolkit, so let's get right into it. Section 1, Anatomy of a Decision. What actually is decision-making? Well, at its core, it's just about choosing the absolute best option from a bunch of alternatives to solve a specific problem, like, say, figuring out how to save a company from declining sales. But hey, not all decisions are created equal, right? Organizations typically face 2 main flavors of choices here. First up, we've got program decisions. These are your routine, repetitive, highly structured tasks. Think of processing the weekly payroll, approving standard vacation requests, or just reordering printer ink. You definitely don't need a massive strategy session for these. You just follow the established rules and move on. But then, on the flip side, we have non-program decisions. Now, these are the high-stakes, incredibly unique, and complex situations. We're talking about entering a brand new international market, acquiring a massive rival company, or responding to a sudden financial meltdown. These require deep analysis, a ton of creativity, and serious judgment, mainly because they carry massive long-term consequences. Moving on to Section 2, 3 models of choice. Let's look at the actual frameworks organizations use to make these big decisions, starting with the ideal scenario.
So how do managers actually tackle the really big choices? Well, we start with the gold standard, the rational decision-making model. It follows this beautifully logical, systematic approach. First, you identify the exact problem. Second, you collect every single piece of relevant information. Third, you evaluate all possible alternatives. And fourth, you select and implement the very best one. So for example, if Toyota is deciding to build a new overseas manufacturing plant, they don't just guess or throw a dart at a map. They literally spend months analyzing labor costs, transportation logistics, political stability, environmental factors across dozens of countries. Only after exhaustively evaluating every variable do they finally select that optimal location. Now that sounds totally perfect, right? But here is the catch. It assumes managers have complete information, limitless resources, and basically endless time to evaluate every single option, which leads us to a pretty vital question. But what if you don't have unlimited time? What actually happens in the messy, incredibly fast-paced reality of the business world? This brings us to the bounded rationality model, which was championed by Nobel Prize-winning economist Herbert Simon. He essentially pointed out that, look, our cognitive ability, our time, and our money are strictly limited. So managers use this fascinating concept called satisficing. Instead of endlessly hunting for the mathematically perfect, ultimate solution, managers choose an option that is satisfactory and practical given their constraints. It's good enough. Imagine you desperately need to hire an HR manager within 1 week to handle a sudden crisis. You can't realistically interview 1,000 applicants to find the absolute perfect candidate. Instead, you hire the person who meets all the core requirements and can start bright and early on Monday. You have, in essence, satisficed. Then we have our third model, intuitive decision-making. This is where subconscious thinking and pattern recognition completely take the wheel. And this brilliantly illustrates how vital human experience really is in leadership. When a massive crisis hits and there is literally 0 time to analyze data, managers have to rely on their hard-earned instincts. Think back to the very start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Organizations had to instantly shift thousands of employees to remote work with almost no concrete information about what the future held. Managers couldn't wait around for a 6-month rational study. They just had to use their judgment to act swiftly. The best leaders, of course, learn to blend this rapid gut-level intuition with logical analysis whenever they possibly can. Section 3, the power of group decisions. Because, let's face it, modern complex problems usually require multiple minds to ensure our blind spots are covered. But, and this is a really big but, there is a dangerous, hidden trap in collaborative environments: groupthink. This happens when the desire for team harmony completely overrides a realistic appraisal of the alternatives. People just nod along. They don't want to rock the boat or contradict the boss. And this is exactly how terrible decisions get green-lit without a single person raising a red flag. To fight this, truly great leaders actively invite dissenting opinions and deliberately create a space where constructive criticism is actually rewarded, not punished.
Which leads perfectly into Section 4, overcoming biases and traps. Because we have to ask, what happens when human nature just completely gets in the way of logic? The truth is, our brains naturally look for shortcuts, and these 3 cognitive biases are remarkably common in corporate boardrooms. First up, confirmation bias. This is when a manager already has a favorite idea, so they only look for data that proves them right, totally ignoring all the glaring warning signs. Actually, scratch that. It's more like putting on blinders to anything that disagrees with you. Next is overconfidence bias, where past successes make a leader blindly believe they're basically infallible. And finally, anchoring bias. This causes us to rely way too heavily on the very first piece of information we hear, like an initial price quote in a negotiation, letting it completely skew everything that follows. Throw in high stress, excessive optimism, or a bit of fear, and you've got a recipe for disastrous choices. Section 5, the manager's toolkit. Let's look at the practical techniques organizations actually use to combat these biases and protect themselves. First up is an absolute classic for a very good reason, the SWOT analysis. Before making any major strategic move, a savvy manager maps out these 4 quadrants. Strengths and weaknesses look internally at what the company does well and where it's lacking. Opportunities and threats look externally at market trends, competitors, the broader economy. It is incredibly simple, but man, is it powerful for making sure you aren't making a huge choice in a total vacuum. Another total must-have is cost-benefit analysis. This is where you strip away all the emotion and just weigh a decision financially. Do the expected benefits, like say increased revenue or grabbing more market share, do they actually outweigh the associated costs, like implementation expenses and massive resource drain? Managers also rely on tools like decision trees to visually map out different futures, or the Delphi method to anonymously pull expert opinions without groupthink getting in the way. And increasingly today, organizations are feeding their data into AI-driven analytics to spot trends that human minds simply couldn't process on their own. All right, final section, Section 6, culture, crises, and ethics. Because none of these choices happen in a sterile laboratory. Decisions happen out in the real world under extreme pressure, relying heavily on the foundational compass of the organization. Crisis management is literally the ultimate stress test for decision-making. Whether we're talking about a massive supply chain disruption, a crippling cyber attack, or a natural disaster, crises demand incredibly clear communication, rapid evaluation of whatever limited facts you have, and totally calm execution. But even in a panic, your ethical standards cannot be sidelined. Think of companies like Johnson & Johnson, who are historically recognized for prioritizing customer safety, even pulling products at a massive financial loss during a crisis. Those calculated, highly ethical choices aren't just a nice thing to do, they build unshakable, long-term public trust. Furthermore, the right environment actually drives innovation. So the crucial point is this: your organizational culture completely dictates the quality of your choices. The Apples, the Googles, the Amazons of the world, they foster environments built on radical trust and transparency. They actively encourage their teams to take calculated risks. They avoid those rigid, fear-based hierarchies where employees are just terrified to speak up. Instead, they view every single decision, yep, even the ones that totally fail, as an opportunity for continuous learning. And that brings us to a really powerful thought to wrap up on. Every decision you make today shapes the success of your organization tomorrow. From the mundane, routine tasks to those high-stakes, intuition-driven crisis responses, your choices literally form the bedrock of your company's future. So, now that you know the cognitive biases that try to trick your brain,